Welcome back to Modern Western Buddhism. Last time we covered just a short section of the foundation of all good qualities related to developing powerful motivation to train in meditative concentration and more generally to train in the whole path of meditation insofar as it concerns Buddhist practice. To summarize what we covered last time, the Lamrim is a text that means the graded sequential stages of the path. So graded meaning they move along in an ascending order, right? They have been put in a graded order, A, B, C, D. And sequential meaning that they are to be carried out one after the other. And among these steps and stages, there is some wiggle room when you actually look at the recommendations provided by some of the great masters who wrote these texts and the later practitioners who use these texts. Generally, the advice is first, as we've discussed many times, you get a very sort of general word salad kind of understanding. You have the right words in your head. If somebody asked you general questions about the path, you would be able to say, yes, I know the right words to respond to that question. But those words don't really have a lot of meaning to you at that stage. Next, having gained that level of understanding of the path, you then do a bit of practice and you do a bit of contemplation. You're asking questions of other practitioners and your teachers. You're reading a number of texts in your lineage, probably if you're still, just on the path for the last 5 years or 10 years or so. Venturing out into a lot of different paths in the early stages tends to just confuse people. Much better to stick with one path. So you're in this lineage of teaching and training, you're talking to senior students and so on, and you've made these understandings much more robust, right? You have a little bit of sort of training background. You don't really have the experience yet. At some point through all of this work to try to understand what it is you're doing and trying to put it into practice, you get a little taste, right? And that taste is, they would say in the text, it's constructed. Sometimes it's translated as contrived. And really what this means is that you can only generate a certain realization through an extended conceptual process. So as an example, maybe looking at the first actual topic of meditation in the Lamrim, this is a topic found in the Pali Suttas and put at the beginning of the training process in the Tibetan tradition, where or in which you realize how precious it is to have the opportunity to train in these profound meditative systems that can take you all the way to the goal of release or all the way to the goal of enlightenment if you'd like to go all the way to enlightenment. And contemplating this, you're supposed to generate an emotion. You're supposed to generate a feeling. In fact, the text is extremely explicit when you read the Pali Suttas. It says, I'm paraphrasing, but as though a person with their hair on fire or their clothing on fire is looking for a pond in which to dive, this person whose clothing or hair on fire will have extreme discernment, extreme energy, extreme perseverance, extreme desire to put out this flame on their person. How do you develop that kind of intensity of your desire, the intensity of your drive, the intensity of your perseverance, no matter how much pain, difficulty, loss of resources, loss of whatever I have to endure, I'm going to get to the end of this, to the bottom of this, right? This is absolutely intense kind of psychological drive you're trying to cultivate. How do you do that? Well, first, you have to realize through really thinking these things through that, this is an incredibly precious opportunity I have here. And that's the first level of the taste of having that realization. We also throw around this word realization a lot in Buddhism. Sometimes you see actualization, which I think is slightly better, but it still sounds a little floppy somehow. All this really means is that you become like that. That's it. Before, you weren't like that, and now you are like that. And you're like that all the time. It's just how you are, right? When you wake up on any given Tuesday, you have this sense that, wow, this is an incredibly precious opportunity, and I really better make the most of it. And that feeling that you better make the most of this opportunity is like your hair or your clothing is on fire. Another description in the text you might find is the description of a mother whose only child has passed away. And this mother is completely overwhelmed by grief. And whether she's sleeping or waking, walking or sitting, bathing, and blah, 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 this grief is always there, constantly present. It's just how she is. She is constantly in grief. And in the exact same way, the realization of the preciousness of a human rebirth is that you have a constant, persistent desire to make the absolute most, best, highest, greatest use of this rebirth, this condition in which you're a human being with a brain that can think and a heart that can be molded and transformed, and that you're going to do that really at any personal cost, right? That you will do whatever it takes to make sure that you make progress and that you don't waste this opportunity. When you look at television from the 90s and 2000s, you have all these shows that popped up, like Fear Factor, for example, where people were willing to do anything, practically anything whatsoever, to make a little bit of money. And at least while they were on the show, they would lie, they would eat live insects, they would face whatever fear they had to, they'd face discomfort, shame, exposing themselves, exposing terrible faults and shortcomings of their own, blah, 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 you name it. They would risk it all, really. In some cases, even potentially risking their lives or, getting maimed or injured just to make a few bucks on television. When you look at YouTube, there are people who are willing to say and do anything to become a little bit notorious online. If they can get famous and they can get likes and they can get a little bit of the easy life, maybe, from becoming an influencer, they'll do whatever it takes. They don't care how disgusting what it is that they have to do. They don't care how much it hurts. They don't care, man. And we have to develop this level of strength in our motivation. So says the sutra path that you find in the Pali Suttas, by and large. So says the Lamrim path that you find in the Tibetan traditions. Arguably, you also find this in much of the stages of Zen. Although today, we're going to be changing gears in that regard. But to wrap up the sort of final description of the Lamrim that I'll do in this series, the final condition, right, a realization, an actualization of some point of the path, is becoming so habituated to that way of thinking and feeling that that's just how you naturally react all the time. When it's relevant for that reaction or thought to be present, it just is, because that's how you are. And that doesn't happen by magic. It's not like some people are just blessed, like they read the book once and then they have these, this state of mind that's there all the time. I mean, maybe some people do, but if that's not you, there's a method. There's a method where you go from just hearing it and you get the words, and then you think about it and you talk to advanced practitioners and get advice from your teachers and spend time in the lineage, and you get sort of a general meaning, and you're doing some practice along with that, and then you get a taste of it. And then through a little bit of concentration, right, which is the point, the overall point of this whole series, through a little bit of concentration, you then start to, okay, take that taste and expand it a little bit, and then a little more, and then a little more, and it becomes more and more and more natural, just like any other skill or thought or feeling, um, really any other training process that is serious in the world. And when it becomes completely natural, it's realized, it's actualized, it is just how you are. So that is the hair on fire version that really encompasses the first four approaches to getting rid of laziness, doesn't it? It really covers this entire sutric approach, except for one thing, the thing that we're going to be talking about today, which I have gone back and forth on, and I think I'm settled, at least for now. I think we're going to call it the advanced intention. So without further ado, let's get into the topic for today. Give me a moment to transition over to the text. One moment. Okay, there we are. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So, the advanced motivation. The advanced motivation. For those of you who have spent some time training in Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Zen, Chan, Zhuoguang from the Taoist tradition, this may very well be where you started. And it may very well be why probably there's not very many of you who started this series who are still here. Because this is the final intent, the final motive, the advanced intention, the advanced motivation, the resultant motivation, the resultant intention, right? So as in Kyudo, in the later stages of training, we must pull the bow perfectly and learn how to get concerned for hitting targets out of the way. So previously in the training, we had a big target, right? We looked at all the benefits of meditation. We looked at all the drawbacks of not having the capability to focus on the object. Not only that, we looked at Maitreya's approach, where we're trying to get a taste of this one and that one and this one and that one and this one, so that we're extremely driven to keep going through the process. And then we looked at the Lamrim approach, which mirrors the Pali Suttas in a lot of regards, although it's not as organized in exactly the same way. Which is saying you need to develop these powerful motives that are like your hair is on fire, where you're trying to get out of samsara, you're trying to get out of this terrible situation of rebirth, and you're cultivating the desire to never be reborn anywhere in samsara again. Or perhaps you're cultivating the desire just to gain samadhi so that you don't have to be reborn in this sort of gross or coarse circumstance where you have this, floppy physical body that's got like meat slopped on top of a skeleton. It's not very graceful. So The final intention, the final motivation, doesn't involve any of that. At this level of the training, and hopefully it'll become obvious right away why this is an advanced practice and not something that really you start with. It's something that emerges from doing the other approach. This approach is continually returning to the natural condition, continually returning to the way things actually are, and then just behaving appropriately based upon what is obviously there and what is obviously not there. That's it. It's just perfectly concordant action. You perceive correctly or as correctly as you can, and you react correctly or as correctly as you can in the circumstance. And that by itself is the continuation of the process of training in meditative stabilization. So what you can't do with the arrow is like push the arrow in the air all the way to the target and make sure it hits a bullseye. The only thing you can do is just stand as perfectly as you can and pull the bow as perfectly as you can and release the arrow as perfectly as you can, as concordantly as you can based upon what's actually occurring. And all by itself, that process is the sublime process of training in meditative concentration. And it really doesn't matter what activity you're doing, as long as that activity isn't overtly harmful to other beings. So Awa Kenzo, who's pictured below here, is among the most famous, I would say, sort of Zen archers of Japan. And I hope that for some of you, just looking at this image is a somewhat profound experience, because you can see the release of his skeleton, the release of his muscles, the perfect focus and the grace with which he holds the bow and the arrow. And I've known at least one person who trained in Kyudo, and they said that, I mean, you can't tell from this photo, but that bow goes way up in the air. It's like, I think, taller than Awa Kenzo is. They said to even pull that bow back requires enormous physical strength. That, the gentleman that told me this is an extremely strong person, like a 4th degree black belt, and, not somebody you'd want to mess with. And they said they couldn't even pull the bow and get it back into the position. And here's Awa Kenzo holding it with like complete ease and grace. And so the advanced intent, the advanced motivation is simply to behave and act concordantly, which means that you need to get I and mine out of the way, right? Awa Kenzo said, each shot of the bow, each shot of the arrow can make or break you. Each shot reveals you as a living Buddha or a bumbling fool. What does this mean? It means that you do what can be done right now as correctly as can be done right now. That's all. In archery, this means you pull the bow as perfectly as possible, and when the arrow leaves the bow, it's entirely beyond your control. Similarly, when training to maintain the resulting intention, the intent that we're talking about now, you maintain your internal condition unfettered by goals, targets, expectations. There's no longer a deep drive to get any particular thing done. You're beyond, or rather, you're simply trying to fully engage with the current moment of activity as it is. So the struggle now is not to attain some goal. It's simply to abide in what you have already seen is the actual condition of reality. And to abide in that condition as fully as possible as often as possible and to act accordingly, or to act according to how that reality actually is all the time. And so what does this mean? It means that you're penetrating the great sealing nature of reality, the inseparability of emptiness and awareness. You're penetrating the final nature of the mind, or at least the conventional nature of the mind on a regular basis. Now, if all of this sounds like some kind of obscure mystical thing to you, then you're not going to be able to employ this approach, I think, quite obviously. Now, is that universally the case? No, of course not. There are some people who can, because of some sort of internal predisposition, they meet a certain teacher or a certain lineage, and there's so much devotion and inspiration right away for whatever reason. I would say probably because they had a connection to that lineage or teacher from the past, but for whatever reason, that intense wave of motivational pressure and that intense wave of devotion to that lineage and that teacher by itself gives them enough juice, enough oomph to bring about the results of the practice using this type of approach without having to do all of these systematic previous types of cultivation first. But unless that happened to you already, then don't hold your breath. You need to go back and do all of the other work first. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, but in Chan and Zen and some of these other traditions, we start here right away. You just start with the most advanced intention, get rid of the goals, get rid of the targets, get rid of, all this stuff. And you just sit there and just be in the moment. The thing is, I've known a lot of people that have done that for a lot of years, and it doesn't seem to have done them any good. It doesn't seem to have transformed their character very much. And a lot of people flunk out of that approach after 2 or 3 years, and then they go back to doing whatever it was they were doing previously. And I think the issue that needs to be addressed here, the sort of elephant in the room, is what is the context in which that type of training would have been delivered to a first day student in a traditional setting? You have to ask this question, right? Because if you've been hanging around Zen circles for a while, you will have heard, for example, of stories where some disciple heard that Venerable Master Takuan was the greatest meditator of the era and went, traveled across Japan and sat outside the monastery in a seated posture without moving, rain and shine, without food, without drink, and as much as they could without falling asleep, enduring all kinds of hardships, until Master Takuan came out and said, okay, you've been sitting here for 7 days or 10 days, you're almost dead, come on in, we'll get you some water and a little food, and then we'll start your training. Think about the character of the type of person who could endure all of that difficulty and pain and stress right out of the gate. The type of person who could employ this level of motivation and intention with real effect needs to already have astonishing personality traits. They need to be able to endure intense pain. They need to be able to follow the advice of their teacher, really without getting any kind of explanation for why or how it works, for extended periods without much doubt in their mind that it's going to work. I mean, this is a pretty demanding condition, isn't it? And the thing is, for some people, it's quite easy. It's relatively easy to sit outside in the sun and the rain and not eat and whatever for 7 days. But then to undergo hardships without a lot of explanation beyond sort of pointing out instructions from a teacher for a decade in order to bring about the results of this type of training is something that they can't handle, right? So the people that actually succeed with this type of approach are extraordinary individuals, right? They're already extraordinarily capable individuals. So my point is, if you'd like to succeed at this type of approach, you need to become an extraordinary type of individual to begin with. Not in some sort of egoic sense that you need to be like extremely proud and better than everyone and all of this. You just need to have good qualities, the common sense kind of stuff that allows you to succeed in things that you put your mind to, and some things that are not common sense, but that you will need to be, you'll need in order to be successful training in a system like this. For example, you need to be patient. You need to be able to endure pain. You need to be able to endure difficulty. You need to be able to endure boredom. You need to be able to have a sort of extremely disciplined approach that if somebody says, I want you to do 14 5-minute sessions a day once every so often, blah, 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 and then you need to carry out this and do this and blah, 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 that hearing all of that, you have the wherewithal to write it down, to commit it to memory, to carry it out, to come back in 2 weeks and ask critical questions about each little piece, blah, 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 right? In other words, you need to have a certain sort of seriousness with which you approach the training beyond just raw stubbornness. You need to have discernment and deep, genuine interest in getting all of the details right about what it is you're doing. And then obviously you do need to be stubborn. You need to have profound force of will that no matter what, you are going to bring this to completion, because especially in modern times, people don't understand what this is. They don't get it. So the idea that you're going to spend 3 to 6 hours a day training like this, for most people, is absolutely off the effing wall. Especially if you're also trying to run a business or raise children or you name it. So if you'd like to pursue this type of approach, you need to already have extremely strong character. There's a few other things. You need to have good ethics. You need to be generous. Then, yeah, okay. And then obviously you need to rely on good teachers, because this approach relies upon pointing out instructions, right? For example, when Dzongsa Rinpoche was training in Dzogchen, his teacher and he lived together, not just trained once a week, okay? They lived in the same house together, and his teacher constantly gave him instructions: how to eat, how to sleep, how to sit, how to stand, how to walk. It is an all-consuming type of activity to pursue this level of the training. So you cannot do this level of training in a casual way and expect to get the results that the great masters have attained. It's just unrealistic. The other thing is, it's just my personal opinion, but I think this type of approach can be damaging for a lot of people, because they think that it means that you just like empty your mind and don't worry about anything and don't do anything and whatever. And what happens for a lot of those people is they just end up chasing their delusions around even more, because they think, oh, there's nothing to do, and there's no right and wrong, and there's no good and bad, there's no right way and wrong way. I just need to like be me. And so the ego actually gets bigger. Oh, look at this me who's now doing the most profound practice in the universe. I mean, it's absurd. Instead, such a person could do one of these previous types of approaches that we've been discussing for the last 5 weeks, where you develop proper motivation, you start developing the right types of character or personality traits, you start studying the right types of materials so that you're really understanding what it is you're trying to do, and then you're getting good advice from a teacher or a lineage that can actually help you bring the practice to fruition. That's much wiser. In terms of this approach, the mind is fundamentally perfect in its final nature. The mind, the nature of consciousness, is already absolutely flawless in its final nature, right? So once you get all the superficial waves and nonsense out of the way, all the fabrications, the kleshas, disturbing emotions, disturbing concepts out of the way, then merely maintaining the awareness of the conventional nature of mind, which is everything that occurs, right? Seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, touching, the phenomenal or phenomenological images that appear in your mind, the mental images, everything that occurs is simply a reflection in the space-like nature of mind. The room that you're sitting in is mind. It's just the image that mind has produced based upon encountering some non-extramental phenomenon, right? Some physical object, perhaps. So either resting in that without fabricating extra stuff on top of it, or resting in the final nature of mind and reality, the emptiness, or we could say the relational nature of all things. Things are empty of a non-relational nature. There is no self-existent or independently existent thing. There are only relationally existent things. So if we can rest the mind, for example, in the absence of some final thing that is me, or we can rest in the conventional appearance while maintaining some awareness that there is no me in there who is absolutely independent of what's occurring in the rest of reality, right? Through maintaining the actual natural condition of how things are, then the behavior becomes concordant with reality, which, by the way, is the whole point of the exercise to begin with. So why is this an advanced or result practice? Well, I mean, hopefully, if you've only been at this for a few years, most of this sounds like total way out there craziness, right? And if you've been at this for a long time, maybe a lot of the words make sense and you've heard this from some other teachers and whatever. But basically all the things we're talking about are currently outside your experience, and they're going to require a lot of experience in order to then maintain, right? In other words, you don't even have a taste of the actual conventional nature of mind in terms of like a non-dual appearance. In other words, you've gotten enough concept out of the way that you can actually look at here's knowing and here's what's being known as one inseparable as an inseparable phenomenon directly from your own experience, right? Or looking even more deeply at the space-like nature of mind, looking at the non-physical aspect of the knowingness that is consciousness. Or even more deeply, looking at the absence of inherent existence of the knowing space-like quality that gives rise to these non-dual conventional appearances up here at this level of awareness. All of those things, right? All three of those things, the conventional appearances, the non-dual conventional appearances, the space-like appearance of a knowing awareness, and the emptiness of that space-like appearance of knowing awareness, all of these are pretty advanced experiences that require that you've already done training in the past. So there's actually no way to extend and deepen and stabilize those experiences unless you have them already. So how do you get them? Well, you get them by doing everything we've been talking about for the last 6 weeks. Now, once you have a taste of those, in particular, if you have a taste of those in a tradition that teaches both approaches, right? It teaches the sutra approach with all of the goals and motives and targets and, intense drives and all of this. But it also teaches the end stage, the resultant stage kind of things. well, then hopefully you have a teacher or a mentor who at some point will go, okay, now that you're tasting this non-dual appearance aspect in your ordinary activities, you need to start dropping some of the goals away, and that will help speed up the process of bringing meditative stabilization into your direct experience. You also find this level of motivation in the Pali tradition. I believe Ajahn Chah, in one of his texts, he writes about this, but it's also found in the Hindu tradition. You find it in the Kundalini yoga tradition, and you find it in Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness. And from what I understand, not 100% sure, but from what I understand, the later stages, not the early stages, but the later stages of transcendental meditation, you find this kind of approach. So why is this approach found all over the place? You can find it in the Chinese traditions. You can find it in the later Indian tradition, where Venerable Nagarjuna talks about it as a particular type of samadhi. He calls it aimless concentration. Not aimless in the sense of you don't know where to go, but that you're not clinging to essence. You're not clinging to inherently existent or absolutely existent things. You probably remember this word sat from earlier, sat chit ananda, right? Being, consciousness, absolute being, consciousness, bliss, from the from the Hindu traditions earlier, way back in the introduction videos. And you're not clinging to asat, the absolute non-existence of things. So the mind no longer aims at bhava. It no longer aims at an essentially existent phenomenon, either oneself or other things. It doesn't aim at absolute existence or absolute non-existence. So this is a mind that is abiding within the middle way of a middle way view. How can you abide in a middle way view if you don't even understand what the middle way view is at an intellectual level? Beyond that, you don't have a taste of it. If you don't have a taste of it, then how do you expand that taste, right? So we could say quite a bit more really on this, but that's basically the essence, right? You find this approach all over the place because it's extremely effective once you have a bit of experience, and if you're in a lineage that has this type of approach, then at some point incorporating this as a tool in the tool bag that you're using to start training in meditation is good. However, you have to really think through this carefully. And when we get to the stages of meditation, which will be coming down the line here, it's a little bit down the line. We've got a ways to go before we get to the 9 stages, but when we get there, you'll start to see, okay, a lot of effort and goals and targets need to be put in place to get to the end stage of training in samadhi, right? Of this, at least the 9 stages of getting to the first jhana. So in order to understand where this level of motivation and all of that fits, it really comes into play when someone is more so either, again, in one of these lineages where this approach comes in towards the beginning and you're pointing out instructions, or it comes in as you're getting closer to the end of training in samadhi. Why does it come in there? It comes in there because you've actually cultivated a state that is both lucid and stable, and you've eliminated the faults from that state. including having a lot of background conceptual activity going on. A lot of that has ceased. Almost all of it has ceased. And so now the big problem is that you're applying too many antidotes when the problems aren't actually there anymore. You just have this habit of applying antidotes again and again and again, even when the problem isn't occurring. And so the solution, they say in the text, is equanimity. In other words, you just need to relax. But that doesn't come until way late in the process, right? So dissolving the powerful motives that you use to get to that point is part of the process of completing the training. Yeah? Okay. In my opinion, and not just my opinion, but the opinion of some of the great saints of the Buddhist tradition, if you try this kind of technique too soon, and in particular try it without personalized advice in a traditional lineage that teaches this approach, you're probably going to just spend years doing what Hakuin Ikaku, the great reviver of Rinzai, called do nothing Zen. In other words, you sit around increasing your own psychological problems, you make yourself less capable in terms of benefiting yourself, less capable in terms of benefiting others. And so, as the Tibetans say, this is worse than useless. This is why, in my humble opinion, you don't find this approach discussed in positive terms in much of the Lamrim tradition in general. Because until you have a foundation of good character and ethics and generosity and these other qualities you need to be successful in meditation, then trying to just pretend that you're doing the end stage stuff, it's just a joke. So you need a lot of previous training to then be able to merely rest in the natural condition, to merely rest in how things actually are. Hopefully that's an obvious statement, but in the West here it has not been so obvious. You need a lot of previous training to merely rest in the final state of a perfectly concentrated mind. Why? Well, because that state of mind takes a lot of effort to generate. So to be able to rest there, you first have to generate the effort to get there. It's like climbing a mountain. You can't rest on the summit until you've summited the mountain. And you don't rest at all until you're on the summit. I hope this makes sense to most people who are watching this. So effort, intense effort, it must be involved. And that means that if you have effort, you're also going to have intense drive, desire. You freaking want it. You're interested. You're passionately interested and want the result. And you're willing to do whatever is practical, right? Whatever is actually functional to get to the result. So you're not just desperately clinging to the result in some sort of blind way and you'll do whatever. Oh, I'll just do it. No. This is an absolutely crystalline, focused type of desire that you're going to carry out precisely what is needed today in order to take the next step in the process to get the work done. It's workmanlike, right? So in brief, I say in the text here, this is all a bit advanced, but it's also worth mentioning just to dispel the misunderstandings about this topic. Also, this is where we're headed. No matter what Buddhist path you're on, you eventually end up at this type of training. You know, if you're on an Arhat path, on the Theravada path in the Thai forest tradition, or one of the other Theravada schools, eventually you have to drop goals and targets, because nirvana is a state without goals and targets, right? It is utterly without tanha, without craving for being or non-being or sensual pleasures. So at some point, the goals and targets go away. You don't want to be, you don't want to not be, you have no desire aimed at any of the sensory objects that appear to the mind when you're not in a state of meditation. So this is a universal phenomenon. If you're training in meditative stabilization, at some point you have to start dropping these things away. But what I've seen over the years is a lot of people drop. It's like they're standing on a ladder trying to climb up to a high peak, and they get like halfway up the ladder, and they step off onto the cliff face. There's like a little shelf there, and they step onto the cliff face and just kick the ladder off the mountain. The only place to go from there is down. You know, it's going to be a bloody climb from there, and you're probably going to slip and fall if you make any more progress at all. So don't kick the ladder away. Stick with the graded sequential stuff. And at the appropriate juncture, if you're in a lineage where this is the flavor that you eventually end up in, then your teachers will help you and tell you at the appropriate time when to take those steps. Yeah. Okay, today's a short video. That's actually it. So to review, the advanced intention, the final intention, the resultant intention is simply to do the next right thing. It is to do the next most concordant thing based upon how things actually are. To do that, you need to have already penetrated how things actually are. To penetrate how things actually are, you already need a great deal of experience in meditation and contemplation and study, which means that you had good teachers, you had good colleagues on the path. As the whole of the Holy Life Sutta says, I paraphrase, Ananda, don't say that. Ananda, don't say that. Having mentors and companions on the path is not half of the holy life, it is the whole of the holy life. In order to make progress, we must have companions on the path, we must have good teachers who are giving us general advice, we must have good mentors who are giving us personalized advice. And through this process, we will make our way towards the most advanced types of intentions where just the force of habit of relying on the right sources of information and doing the right types of training will be a self-sustaining process. And there's no longer a need to be constantly aiming the mind towards some pond in which to dive, right? The hair doesn't have to be on fire anymore. You're just headed the right direction. And that's it. That's really all there is to this approach. Except that those who are engaged in this approach they're not like engaged in dudism, where they're just like, yeah, man, whatever, let's have another White Russia and everything's good, man. No. This particular brand of training is notorious, whether you're talking about the Taoist versions, where the cycle of training in some cases is like 8 years long, and you have to do, 2 or 3 hours of sitting a day as a layperson or more. Or you're talking about things like, I believe the Nyingma tradition has something like 3 years, or 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, blah, blah, blah. They have these extremely long training cycles where you're training basically 8 or 16 hours a day, or all day, for years. In Zen, it's notorious. You want to talk about Rinzai, for goodness sake. I mean, in the Rinzai schools, they sit unwaveringly like mountains facing a wall for 8 or 16 hours a day. So the just rest approach is the most demanding. It is not the most laid back. This is what people get wrong about this. This is like the Navy SEALs version. You are so committed, you're so devoted, you have such good character at this point that you can do whatever it takes. And so there's no reason to think about getting anywhere anymore. You're just going to carry out today whatever needs to be done. And today what needs to be done is another 16 hours of sitting facing a wall. So we do that. We do that, no problem. So If that's not the type of character you already have, then this approach might be something that's good to know. It might be good, even something good to work with from time to time. But in my humble opinion, it shouldn't be your primary approach. And this is coming from someone who trained in this approach with an extraordinary pointing out teacher for 17 years. Okay? Okay. Per the usual, if you'd like to support this channel, in the link below is my Patreon. The money from that goes towards Buddhist texts that may be used for my PhD or my personal practice. And the money from there also goes towards making donations to Buddhist causes, as well as supporting my personal practice in more general ways, like helping me fund retreats or things related to my own training. So if you'd like to do that, it is meaningful to me. However, contributions are not required. My main hope is that you will make progress in whatever Buddhist lineage or tradition that you're currently training in, through disambiguating and getting rid of some misunderstandings that we have as modern people, and quite often modern Western people who want to train in Buddhism. Thank you again for tuning in, and I should be back, I hope, next week, where we will be talking about the next topic. We're finally over laziness, and now we're going to get to what are the appropriate places, what are the appropriate dwelling conditions for training in meditation. Thank you.